What's the difference between organized crime and the government?
You tell me.
Organized crime doesn't have a 12-year indoctrination plan to convince you that they're not organized crime. So in 1938, the United States government, well, technically in 1941 or 42, Operation Underworld, the United States start working with the mafia. But in 1938, our good buddies, MI6, started working with Meyer Lansky and the whole heroin syndicate and the French Connection, all these sort of things. And then they hand that off to the nascent CIA, right? So it starts with, intelligence, which was what? It's a group of monopoly of force, spy master type people that work to protect East India Company interests of the Crown, interests of the South Africa Company, interests of the Hudson Bay Company, these sort of things, right? Now, MI6 traditionally goes back to like 1906, beginning of the 1900s, but it's just the evolution of the East India Company's. It's like a privatized into a government type thing, and that's the same as. When the East India Company privatized in 1832, when Skull and Bones at Yale, right? Yale is the East India Company University. Elihu Yale worked for the East India Company. You have this Skull and Bones German death cult, and they're all opium warlords, basically. That's where it comes from. The privatization of East India Company in 1832 gives a bunch of Americans that are in the Anglo-American establishment a whole lot of money and power, and that grows Yale as this inculcation of royalty and the British Empire methods in America to train our Mandarin class so we can be ruled. So there's a huge transfer of wealth on the other side of the world from the British or from the Indian, from the Mughals to the British Raj. And then that power structure transfers into America in the 20th century. We become the prophylactic for the British Empire.
And let's talk about that, because you talk about the British Empire and kind of the models and the ideal sets that carry on, right?
Yeah.
And those alliances carry on well after the Revolutionary War, obviously. Business has to be done, import, export, trade, banking. It all has to be taken care of. Now, I actually brought you up on the show Thursday, whenever anybody's watching this. Brought him up on the show Thursday because you've done extensive research and exploration on one of the books behind you, Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley.
Yeah.
And you just talked about kind of this European establishment infiltrating our system of governance, which is supposed to be separate to that, but still being in business. And really one of their major historians, if not their major historian, was Carroll Quigley. And he talks about these type of groups, the Rhodes Scholarship, which you've alluded to. You get into the Council on Foreign Relations. Give people that scope. And I talked to my audience about that in relation to their current historian, Neil Ferguson, who's an attendee at the Bilderberg groups and often gives a academic spin on what's going on with power groups like the Bilderberg group, which he attends. And he did so with Brian Lamb. I played like a 6-minute clip of it from 2016. It's a really interesting clip. But I would say that Quigley and Ferguson are very much, Ferguson right around that time would be the same time Quigley was attending those meetings and being their historian. Is there a parallel there, and why?
I think Ferguson is the modern evolution of a Carroll Quigley that saw that he could sell out and become an official biographer of the Rothschild family, 2-volume set, of Kissinger, of all these other people that he's written about, of the British Empire as well. So even though I think he pronounces it, even though it's spelled the same as the guy from the Imperial College COVID thing, but because he's Irish or Scottish, it's Neil Ferguson, and he was teaching at Harvard not too long ago. So I like his work. I don't agree with his references. Like, he'll tell you a story in the Rothschild book, but there's no references because he's like going to look at the archives, then he'll tell you, but he's not going to tell you where that stuff's at, so you can find it yourself. Right?
Of course, yeah.
So I've ran into a lot of his work over the years, and I enjoy reading his work, and I learned from it. But Quigley was up against something that really challenged his paradigm. And Neil Ferguson's always been on the other side. He's
a spin master for it.
He's eating the steak.
So he's pretty much like the Bernaysian spin master and spokesperson for this agenda, where you feel like when Quigley was let in, he was kind of almost brought in as kind of the devil's advocate, should they be doing this, and maybe talking to them. But then he ends up mentoring Bill Clinton. That's another thing that I brought up later on.
Yeah, there's a couple layers to that, because first off, this is the book we're talking about. It's a great big book. It's 1,300 pages. It's heavy. You can use it as a doorstop. I don't recommend starting here, but you should know this exists, right? This book exists, printed in 1966. They destroyed the plates in 1968 to take it off the market, so you couldn't read the 50 pages in here that you really need to read. And it's well hidden in 1,300 pages. So what I recommend is if we go to here, we got the, let's zoom out. Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joseph Plummer. It's free on his website, josephplummer.com. He has an audiobook version. You can read the book version in the afternoon. It's great, and it's a good part of the story. And it includes Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment. So he's summarizing two big books. Now, this particular book, this is the first story. Quigley gets this story from Alfred Zimmern, who's a member of Cecil Rhodes's Roundtable. He gets it in 1947-48. So this book is written in 1948, but he doesn't publish it until after he's dead in 1981. He was scared to publish this book during his lifetime. The Union Jack is surpassing the American flag, which is in distress. It's all right here in the cover. There's a group of people, and they've seen fit to destroy America and rebuild it in their image so they could take it over the world. But this also is a very dense book. There's a lot of names you have to learn to be able to understand what Quigley's telling the audience. And so that's why Tragedy and Hope 101 is a useful starting point. Now, let's say you read this book, you understand what's in this book, you know the people involved, and you want to know more. Then there's this book. I wrote the foreword for Sean Stone's New World Order. We also did the cover art, and it's a similar motif. All the people that are participating, their pictures are like in the flags. It's a 200-page book. You read it in the afternoon. This takes the next step, and it shows the evolution of the British scholars under the Rhodes Scholarship that came to America and how they changed the attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs, mentoring people like Bill Clinton, overseeing people like Kissinger, Brzezinski. Brzezinski's partner, Samuel Huntington, is a Rhodes Scholar that's mentoring him in all the things that he needs to do. Crisis of democracy, all that trilateral stuff that comes up later is a function of this coterie of people. And what Sean wrote in this book was his history thesis at Princeton University. So when he asked me, I was a little incredulous. I was like, what do you know about it? And then I read it, and I was like, this is unassailable. This is fact after fact after fact. I would be proud to write the foreword for it. And then if you want the coup de grace, doping, Britain's opium war against the world. And then you start, and I'm not saying everything in the book is true, but when you start looking up, who is the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC? Oh, they're a big money laundering bank to this day. And then FBI investigates, says we got to, there has to be a fine. James Comey has to go sit on the board of HSBC now. And then they give $100 million to Hillary Clinton. So there's a whole bunch of skullduggery just in the HSBC.
I'm sure that's a coincidence. How dare you? How dare you? You bespeak the Hill Dog and the Comb? Comey, I mean, he's a pretty honest guy, bro.
I played the clips last week of Hillary laughing about getting the rapist off, the child rapist.
Oh, I brought that up on the show today too. Yeah. I brought up
Classics.
Whitewater as well, and I brought up Webb Hubble, and I just said, let's just type in Webb Hubble and Hillary Clinton and see what comes up.
Type in Webb Hubble and Chelsea Clinton, see what comes up.
Well, I mean, you don't even have to. That's the point. That's the point. It's why is Chelsea there? That's so weird.
Yeah. So, HSBC, I interviewed a whistleblower from Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation called John Cruz. And he's like, the U.S. government fined them $2.3 billion for doing $23 billion in money laundering. So if you just pay the 10% fine, you get to keep operating is basically how it works at these higher levels because you're serving the crown. And it's an accident that there's a syringe on here, this book from the 80s, because it was about heroin and opium back then. But the new crown virus brought us a whole different perspective on that.
Very, very interesting.
That's why like the beginners, man. If you get that basic grammar, then other people are going to say, well, there's trilateral and Bilderberg and all these different things. But when you read the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes, he says, here's the Freemasons, here's the British Empire, here's John Ruskin. I'm going to take all these ideas of what they want, put it together in a package, and leave my De Beers money to it. Where did Cecil Rhodes get his money for De Beers? From Lord Rothschild, who sponsored him to go to South Africa. So he just leaves it back to the same group. And for the first 5 editions of the will, it says straight up Lord Rothschild. And then they change it later because the public's going to figure out. They say Lord Rosebery, who's Lord Rothschild's son-in-law. So it's it's going back to the same people. And then the Rothschilds fund the Oxford Rhodes Scholarships, which I thought, how, like, this is right here in print. I have the official history of the Rhodes Scholars. They tell me in here. So once I got away from internet and I could see, here's a first edition of, Woodrow Wilson or Andrew Carnegie saying these things, then I could start like having building blocks of understanding.